Good morning, everybody. Say good morning, Theo.
Good morning.
Want a CV that gets your attention from your potential employer for that dream job? Then keep watching.
Lions roaring in the morning sun, searching for a longer day.
For careers advice and behind the scenes of working in conservation, subscribe to my channel and click on that bell notification so you get informed when I release a new video. If you want to get that dream job and you want a CV that grabs the attention of a potential employer and doesn't put them off straight away, then watch to the end of this video for some tips of what to include and what not to include. This is part 2 of a series and I'll link the other videos below. The first one is on cover letters and the last one will be on interviews. The reason I'm doing these videos now, over the years I have reviewed a lot of applications, shortlisted for jobs, interviewed for jobs. Just recently we've been in the process of filling a position where we had to review 85 applications, shortlist them to interviews and second interviews. So I've got a few things like fresh in my mind, and I thought I would share them with you now as it may help somebody out there. And just a quick note that I'm obviously from the UK, so I'm coming from the UK kind of background of what a CV is. I know it's different, especially between the UK and the States. So in the UK, a CV is very much like the States resume, a short 2-page document overviewing your kind of work experience, your education history. Some coming from a UK perspective, so just to put that out there straight away, it might be different in your country and you would have to look at what you need for where you are applying for the job. I read the other day that a recruiter spends the average of 6 seconds looking at a CV. 6 seconds. That means you've got very little time to grab their attention and to make it clear that you are right for the job in hand. The employer is not going to kind of sift through pages and pages and pages of experience and try and find the bits that they need to be filled. You really have to tailor your CV to the job you're applying for. You need to make sure those key skills are listed very prominently. So the number one tip is to do your research. You shouldn't submit the same CV to multiple jobs. You should really tailor your CV for that position and that organization. You need to make sure it's very easy to read. As I said, if an employer is looking at your CV for 6 seconds, you need to make sure everything is very clear and it stands out so they know quickly where to go to get the relevant information. So that means using bold headings, not big chunks of text, use bullet points. Make sure the font is very easy to read. It might be tempting to do kind of a fancy font that kind of you think is eye-catching, but it really just needs to be very simple and very clear. Also, what I found in some of the 85 CVs that I recently reviewed, there are a few that were very kind of colourful or had people's pictures on, fancy kind of fonts. And while for some jobs that might be appropriate, I'm thinking of like maybe graphic design jobs, they would want to see that. I would say just to keep it safe and just make it as clear as possible. So black on white paper, if say you're printing them in an office, you're likely going to be printing them in black and white anyway. So you need to make sure that everything's very clear on the page. An important thing is to not waste too much space at the top of the page. Like, don't give too much personal info. You really only need your name, your email address, is very important, and your phone number. You don't need your residential address. You don't need your religious beliefs or your marital status. One thing, if it is relevant, then I would mention that in the cover letter. For example, we recently were recruiting for a manager or a management couple. So then in that case, your marital status would be important and you would kind of describe that in your cover letter. But generally, it's not necessary. So just don't waste the page. I've seen CVs that have the whole page kind of listing all of these things. So just keep it very brief and get straight into like the meat of your CV. After reviewing a lot of CVs, I might actually change my own to reflect this. But some of the ones I read have got kind of a very short kind of personal statement or personal motivation. And I mean like a couple of lines, that's it. An elevator pitch type thing, but in your actual CV. So this is not kind of a lot about your motivation. It's more kind of hard hitting of your skills. Your motivation and convincing the employer that you're fit for that role would particularly go in your cover letter, whereas this would be kind of a couple of lines of like, of all of your CV, what is the most important skills that you can bring to the table. So for example, say I come with 12 years of experience of managing a remote rehabilitation facility, or something like that. I was obviously very specific, but I have managed 75 people in a scout anti-poaching camp, or like the most important thing that is shown in the job description and you have got, then put that in there. And then another thing just below that, I also saw like kind of the key skills and then some bullet points. So any kind of specific IT skills, any languages, any core hard skills that you have seen in the job description that you have, put it right up there. So then it encourages the employer to read further down below in the CV and find whereabouts you gain those skills. So it's kind of a snapshot of your offerings tailored to that role. And we're talking about hard skills here, not soft skills. So don't put kind of good at communication, team player, avoid cliches like that. It's just a complete waste of space. Everybody writes that. You can't describe yourself like that. You have to demonstrate it instead. I've spoken about this before, but if you put like you're passionate about conservation, don't write you're passionate about conservation. Write what you have done to demonstrate that you are passionate about conservation. So, for example, you could say, in my spare time, I have raised X amount of money for this local conservation charity. That already shows you're passionate, because why would you do something in your spare time unless you were motivated to do it, unless you're passionate to do it? Whereas if you just write, I'm a passionate team player, like it just doesn't mean anything and it's a waste of space. And personally, when I read that, I kind of just skim straight past it. It doesn't really mean anything. So the next section would be kind of your work experience. Make sure you put your most recent experience at the top of the CV in the prominent position. I've read a couple of CVs in the last couple of weeks that actually lead with their oldest kind of employment. So it becomes a bit confusing. Noisy Franklin. It becomes a bit confusing when the first thing you're looking at is kind of a paper round you did when you were 16. Remember the 6 seconds. They're not going to troll through all of the jobs and find out what's relevant. Make sure you put clear dates of when you were in those roles, and also kind of where you sat in the organization. Like, were you assistant project manager? Did you have people above you? Were you kind of the top manager in that area? Just give the potential employer a strong idea of where you sat in the organization. So if you've picked up skills or used skills in multiple job roles that you've held in the past, put the bulk of that in your most recent employment. Don't kind of waste space by, if you've had 5 jobs and you've used the same skills, like try not to waste too much space in saying the same thing. Like, all the employer needs to know is that you have that skill and that you've demonstrated it in a work context. Describe the bulk of your experience in your most recent job position, because that is the one that they're going to pay attention to more. It's the most recent position you've held. It's going to be the most senior position you've held, hopefully. Try and list not just your duties in your role, but achievements. Like, what did you bring? So, for example, if you were a fundraiser, you wouldn't just say you worked on raising funds for the organization. You would say, you managed to raise X amount of money for this organization in this time, or you managed to increase their social media following by X amount of people during the time that you were there. So really kind of quantify the impact you have had on your previous employer. Have you kind of saved time in a process? Have you saved them money? What have you done? What impact have you made? Your potential employer kind of wants to see, were you just there and you just kind of skated along and did the bare minimum? Or did you really go above and beyond and make the role your own? Because that is going to be attractive to any employer. One big thing is to not ignore unpaid employment. A lot of people think that it only matters if they were paid for a role. In conservation, it actually can be opposite, because it shows that you've got commitment and passion even when you're not getting anything in return for it. So it's actually a really useful thing to include, and I actually look for that, and I know other people that I have interviewed with also will look for that in a CV. Especially because a lot of NGOs actually deal with volunteers in some way. Having experiences with volunteers or being a volunteer in the past will actually stand you in good stead. You know, especially if you've gained any technical skills from that. Like if it's an internship and you've really boosted your skills by doing that, especially in conservation, it's very important. Your education is not going to be enough to land you that job. And you can't get a good job without having experience. And often the only way to get that experience is through volunteering or internships. So don't hide that down in your way down in your kind of hobbies and interests section or volunteer section. If it's key to that position you're applying for, put it up there. Like, make it prominent. Okay, your hobbies and interests. I actually can't remember if I even have that in my CV. Sometimes I would say don't add it unless it's relevant to the role. Like if it's just, I like socializing with my friends, drinking, going to the cinema and eating out, like don't put that in. It's not really relevant. But if you like photography, or you like being a part of beach cleanups on the weekend, or you love social media, or just try and think what the employer is going to gain by reading that hobbies and interests section. One thing that I actually really do think you should include is any kind of sporting activity. Not necessarily just like that you enjoy sports, but if you compete, or if you do marathons, or if you partake in like bike races, it shows dedication, so it shows something to the employer. And I know in the past Theo didn't have his kickboxing world championship, kind of his kickboxing history in his CV, and he ended up putting it in his hobbies and interests. And I know for a fact that when he got this job, that was one of the things that stuck out to our boss, because she said it shows dedication. It shows that you're committed to something. You will achieve your kind of goals. So I really think it's important to include things like that. And also our CEO was also a kickboxer, so I think that also twigged in his mind as well when he included that. Obviously this is a while ago. He doesn't really do kickboxing anymore. I think when our child comes, it's going to be a trained kickboxer. So there we go. I think that is all my kind of tips or hints for writing your CV. If you've got any questions, please put them below. If you know someone who's applying for jobs at the moment, please share this with them. Please hit the like button and all those good YouTube things. Have a great day and join me next time. Join me next time when we'll be chatting about interview tips. Thank you. Bye. It's one Franklin up there and one Franklin down there, having a nice little conversation. So if you've used
What? Are you adding?
because I already got interrupted by the Franklins.
I heard you. Wanted to shout, shut up!